Hi, welcome. My name is Chisom Udeze. I'm the founder of Diversify, the organization behind this initiative. I am an economist and a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practitioner and enthusiast. So today, I'm really excited to be here with this wonderful group of people and to learn from them. We're going to explore how we can include diverse voices in DEIB discourse and initiatives and projects in the Nordics, because right now we see that there is a lot of room for improvements. So yes, looking forward to learning how we can implement best practices. And these are practitioners from the respective countries. If you hover on each speaker, you will see which country they represent or they reside in. So I'm gonna get started. And just to say quickly, for those of you here, if you'd like to be on video, feel free. The only people visible are the panelists and myself who have been spotlighted. So the rest of you will not be shown on LinkedIn. Okay, I'm gonna get started and just go down my screen. If we could have a quick introduction from each person. The first person on my screen is Purnima.
Hi, everyone. Very good morning or late morning and afternoon as well. My name is Purnima, and I'm here in wearing two different hats. I'm an associate professor at the Copenhagen Business School. I teach and do research in the area of talent management with a strong focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I also am the CEO and founder of my own company called Talented, and the author of this book, Diversifying Diversity. So I'm wearing a couple of hats today and really excited to be here. So thank you very much for having me, Chisom.
Thanks for being here. Really excited to speak with you. I have recently started devouring your book. It's so good. So yeah, can't wait to hear more. Thank you for being here. Next on my screen is Yves.
Oh, hi, everyone. My name is Yves. Yeah, I'm also having two different hats. Like the first one, I'm the managing director of RFSL Utbildning, a company owned by RFSL who provide diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging training for a company and also government agencies. I'm also a researcher focusing on the minority entrepreneurship and also LGBTQ individuals. Nice to see you all.
Thanks for being here. Next on my screen is Sara.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm very glad to be with you today. My name is Sara Dögg, and I'm a project manager and coordination of education and employment for people with intellectual disabilities in Iceland. I've been working on this issue just since last April with the organization National Association of Intellectual Disabilities named Þroskahjálp. So we are very happy to join this panel today.
Thanks for being here, Sara. And next on my screen is Yesmith.
Yes, hey. So my name is Yesmith Sánchez, and I am originally from Mexico, but I have been living in Finland for 14 years. So I would say that I am from here and there. And I work for an organization and company called Inclusive. And what we do is we bring diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects in an organizational level, so to say. And then what I do here is that I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. So I get to work with different customers and in different projects so to support them how to advance DEI in the organizations. And that is the dream job for me. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us. And last but not least is Melanie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melanie Coffey, and ultimately I'm a storyteller. I was a journalist for 20 years, and I'm in Norway. I've lived here for 7 years. I'm currently the PR and media director, or public relations and media director at Crayon, which is a IT company headquartered in Oslo. As far as diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I've long been an advocate with that, speaking on different panels, and always happy to engage and learn. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Melanie. So I'm going to jump right into it because we have a lot of questions to get through. And I guess the first question I have is a general one to set the stage for each of you. Could you speak a bit to how you think, so basically, how is your respective country, so Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland, doing in terms of including diverse voices in both public and private and workspaces in the country? I hope that kind of makes sense. So basically what I'm asking here is, when discourse around DEIB happens in the public or in the private sector or in your workplace, how diverse are those voices, and how included do you think diverse voices are in the discourse? So I'm gonna start, just go around my screen again with Purnima.
All right, thank you so much. I think it's a great question to take stock of where we are right now. And I'll speak for Denmark. I'll also lay down that I've been here for about 7 years. So I've seen changes over time. I think when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in Denmark, there is a lot of focus on women. And even within women as well, it's only some women, not necessarily the intersectionality of women with other dimensions as well. So yes, we're putting women on the agenda. There are a number of reasons for this. Yes, we're not as great as our wonderful other neighbors in terms of rankings. So we've got some work to do, certainly in Denmark, to even address women and gender. But that's just one aspect. And there's so many even within gender identities that we need to be focusing on, and intersectionality as well. So I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to build on that. But that's where we are. We're very focused on women. We do need to do more. And that's part of the work that I do, is trying to get more on the table.
Thank you for that. Yves?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think Sweden is pretty much similar with Denmark. I think we put really high focus on the women, especially we're focusing on the sex diversity. It's not even gender diversity. So it's literally just binary male and female. So that's what we see in Sweden. And it actually is also shown in the research by Workday, where basically Sweden is actually lower in comparison to EU average when it's come to diversity in overall. So that is actually quite shocking, because people will think that Sweden is actually quite big when it comes to diversity, but actually not really.
Thanks for that. Sara?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because in Iceland we are for many years now, we have been on the top of the list for equal right for gender. So we are doing well in many situations, but for my group, for the people with disability, we really do need to do better. But what is happening right now in Iceland is very exciting thing, because we have actually a new minister for social affairs and labor who has put this issue very strong on his table. So he has mentioned this group of people very often in his action plans right now. So we are very optimistic about what this may be going to happen now for next 2 or 3, 4 years. We will see, and right now we are seeing a bit changes where we can find, feel the different, that the voice of diversity for groups of people with disability is getting stronger from the government, really. So that is very, it's very exciting times right now for our organization and for what we are doing as an organization. And for my work is actually to try to get all the stakeholders together and do these conversations and cooperate together. So yeah, that is, we are doing good in the gender issue, but we need to do better, in at least for people with disabilities. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Yesmith?
Yes, thank you. I was trying to gather my ideas in just a few, but I think that maybe just to summarize, Finland is not yet where we wish it would be. I have to say, though, that I have been working with these topics for about 12 years now here in Finland, and the progress has been noticeable, and that is something that I applaud, of course. But there are several aspects that I think have been overlooked, for example, and I will agree to the fact that that has already been addressed by the previous speakers, which is to the fact that we are either focusing on certain aspects, be it gender or be it internationality, be it language or whatnot, but we are not actually addressing it from a holistic point of view. And I think that we are also sort of like putting it in a certain level where, for example, the responsibility lies in individuals, whether it resides in the government or it resides in organizations. But what I think we are failing to see is that we actually need to do it all together if we are indeed going to be doing something holistic about it. So because I am an optimist, I'm going to say that I think that we are actually taking very big steps towards making progress. But I'm going to also be very honest to say that I believe that the representation still it's still lagging behind. And I think that that is, of course, reflected. The society is rather homogeneous, but at the same time, we do have, for example, language minorities, Swedish-speaking minorities. We also have the Sami people. And yet, when we are recognizing this diversity, the society looks how it looks. So I think I'm going to say that we are making progress, and yet I think that we haven't agreed on what we should be doing progress at. So if I make sense.
Absolute sense. Thank you for sharing. Melanie?
Yes, I think what I have to contribute is pretty much echoes what's already been shared by my fellow panelists. Excuse me. In that in Norway, it's, diversity is often thought of as male, female, and it's definitely binary. And so that's where the focus is. And it's really important that we really expand everyone's horizon on what it means, what diversity means. It's a huge, beautiful tapestry, and that excuse me, that is more than just male, female. So I think the successes are in the areas that we measure and that we focus on. And so that's where you see the successes in gender. When it comes to people of color, people with different physical abilities, and LGBTQIA, all of that, we don't see as much progress because it's not been a focus. And so we need to really do whatever we can to bring more awareness. And for me, as a Black woman, there's the intersectionality of diversity. I'm not Black. I'm not just Black. I'm not just a woman. I'm a Black woman, and it's that intersectionality that it seems really hard to grasp the concepts of the complexity that comes from the intersectionality of racism.
Thank you, Melanie. I hope to unpack that a bit more later during this conversation. It appears from all of your answers, essentially, and from what I know, or I think personally, is that the understanding of diversity in the Nordics is basically around the binary gender, who's a cis male and who's cis female, and everybody else in between just kind of disappears. And also within that binary gender, it's mostly often white Nordic women and white Nordic men. So when we look at other parameters like age, religion, ethnicity, race, this is often lacking. So Purnima, you wrote a wonderful book that I'm currently reading about diversifying diversity. Why is it important for basically all Nordic countries to diversify the way they view and interact with diversity? And what can workplaces do to start to implement this?
Well, the simple answer, Chisom, is that none of us show up in any one dimension. We are all that tapestry that Melanie said. We each of us has a diversity thumbprint. across multiple dimensions. We don't show up in the organization as a woman or a woman of color or a woman of color in a wheelchair all independently. They intersect with each other. And so we have to consider intersectionality, but we've also got to put more dimensions of diversity really on the table. My journey with diversifying diversity began with a very personal, professional story. I was 29 years old, and I had, I had finished my PhD, taught for a couple of years, and I felt ready. I had great student evaluations. I had good peer evaluations, and I was ready to teach a master's course at the university I was with at the time. And I went to my head of department and said, well, here I am. I know there's a position available. Would you consider me for the position? And he looked at me and said, not until you've got a lot more white hair. And that was my moment of saying that, yes, here I am in front of him as a woman of color, but those are not the two dimensions of diversity I'm necessarily only being discriminated on. Here was age. So, the more dimensions we put together, it compounds, and it compounds not in an even way. It could be different experiences. Every person's journey of what bias, discrimination, and representation looks like can be very, very different. But there's a value in this. When we talk about value of diversity, it is not value in any one dimension. It is about having the broadest pool of thoughts, ideas, representation, experiences, skills that we want to bring into the organizational environment. So when we talk about all these wonderful positive benefits that we can get, both from a financial standpoint, but what excites me more is the non-financial, the creativity, the innovation, a workplace culture that is truly diverse, where team performance is enhanced. When we're talking about customer representation, and we're talking about meeting ESG metrics, when we talk about all this value that is to come from diversity, this doesn't come from one dimension. This comes from that tapestry. This comes from that diversity thumbprint. Because the reality is none of us show up in any one dimension. We're all an intersectionality of multiple dimensions. And that's important to put on the table. So if we want to realize that real value of diversity, we've got to think in this way. But of course, it's not just the diversity. That's the factor, what can be measured, some of it. Yves, you're right, absolutely right. There's only some of it that gets measured. The visible dimensions get measured. With GDPR constraints across this region, at least, we can't always even measure the visible dimensions. So, we're not necessarily able to track. Gender is the one, and the binary connotations with gender are the ones that we can easily track and collect data on, and that's what we tend to focus on. But there's a lot more there, the invisible dimensions, the dimensions we're not tracking and tracing. But what's really important is thinking about inclusion. If we want this value to happen, there has to be an inclusive culture that goes with it. You can't get those wonderful things, the value out of diversity, without that inclusion piece. So, we've got to think diversely, or we really have to diversify diversity, because that's where the value lies. It's good for business, it's good for companies, and it's good for society. And that's the underlying reason why we need to do it.
Thanks. Oh my gosh, there's so much in there that came up for me as I listen to you speak, and one very present one for me is intersectionality, and how our different identities compound to shift or impact our experience of the world, where in some cases we might have privilege, and in other places we might not have privilege. And I think that's always interesting, just trying to figure out, how do you negotiate that situation, both as the person on the receiving end of those differences, and also for other people who are learning to, okay, how am I more aware about a person, so I can include them and all their many identities. So very interesting, and a lot to unpack there. Thank you so much for that. So I think this is also, it's a good segue into my next question, which is for Yesmith. So I said earlier, how within Nordic spaces, especially when we talk about DEIB, we have a lot of white voices, and to a large degree, it seems that we overlook voices of people who have these varying and compounding intersectionalities that Poornima spoke about, and in particular here, I'm referring to people of color who are historically marginalized groups. So my question for you is, in creating and designing inclusive spaces and structures, and I know you do this for work every single day, who has a responsibility, and how can we include the whole of society and the workplace and the leaders in this process?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very good one and also a very difficult to answer, but I will try to the best of my ability. I think that what is important to acknowledge is that we all have a level of responsibility and that we all have a contribution to make as such. But I also think that it's important to acknowledge that a lot of these differences and that a lot of this marginalization actually comes from the structures. So as such, what we need and the people who we need to be the most engaged is the people who are actually in the positions of power. So those who can actually make the changes that are going to translate into the structures that is also going to ultimately translate into having more inclusion and to have more voices represented. Why I think this is the roles of everyone is because oftentimes this responsibility lies on us who are already being marginalized and us people of color, for example. And then I have to say, and this is not to victimize myself or anything, but it is heavy enough to be an underrepresented person. And if on top of that, you have to carry the heavy lifting of educating people and making the structural changes, then exactly when are we going to get energy to do also things that have to do with ourselves, with our own thriving, with our own learning? So what I'm trying to say here is that we need allies and we need everyone to actually jump in. And this is not just for being good. I think I will actually resonate with what Purnima was saying. This has a lot of consequences and it has a lot of good positive impacts when it comes to innovations and whatnot. But actually this also is important. It's a business imperative now. We are no longer talking about whether this is good or not. This has to happen. But I also want us to acknowledge that building a diverse team is not enough. It may actually be a liability if you don't know how to manage it. So you have to know when you have walked from diversity, okay, we have diversity, how to manage that, how to lead inclusively, how to go for inclusion, that is imperative. So I believe it's everyone's responsibility, but especially it is the responsibility of people in power. And just as an invitation for everyone who is watching us, do not let all the responsibility on all of us who are from underrepresented groups. It gets quite exhausting, and it also don't think it gets a message across in sometimes. And then also it's oftentimes confused with the fact that we are talking about this because this is our personal quest or our personal story, not because this is actually something that we should be striving for. So in that sense, and to summarize my answer, I think that governments have responsibility, corporate governance has responsibility, and individuals have responsibility too.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And, all very good points in how we can reflect on where the power lies. I think normally when we have conversations around, DEIB, but in the workplace or in the society, I am of the firm belief that leaders have the responsibility, but nonetheless, also as an individual, I also know that I have that responsibility. I don't just wait around that, yeah, that leader is going to take care of it. So I'm just going to sit here and not speak up or be an ally or, create space where I know one needs to be created. So definitely it's multi-layered in how we view it. And, understanding where do we have power? Where can we wield that power? And so thank you for that answer. And on the, since we're looking at inclusion, I want to come to disability inclusion. And this, so my next question here will be for Sara. I think when it comes to disability inclusion, in my organization, we've been learning about this quite a lot, actively and engaging in conversation. And there's very little knowledge as well as provisions for it. I can't speak for other countries, but in Norway, for example, just a quick story here. When I had my daughter, I bought this fantastic pram, and I'm like, oh, I can take this, into the tram. Imagine my surprise, not being able to get a pram with my little kid into the tram in Oslo, right? And then it hit me, what about people in wheelchairs? You know, how do they get around the city? Do they only have that option of taking the bus? You know, and don't they have access to all these other facilities that we should have access to, which also, you know, kind of, I think informs the definition for disability. It's not necessarily that we are disabled, is the world has not enabled us by creating these provisions that enables us to access the same resources. So my question for you, since I know this is something you actively work on in Iceland, how can we create more initiatives that take disability inclusion into account? So basically what I'm asking here is, how have you been able to do this successfully in your workplace?
Yeah, thank you. It's a big question. No, it is. I mean, like you have said, I think the big key on this issue is this cooperation. What we, at least that is how we look at it. We just, our voice is just like what we are shouting out is that we need to be together. We need to get everybody at the table. We need to have this organization. We need to have the government, and we need to have the economy as well to get these changes through. And that is actually what we are focused on this last year and the year. This year we will as well. That is bringing everybody together. Þroskahjálp, this organization that I come from, we do get some financial contribution from the government for our work. So they are actually supporting our organization to push the government as well. So that is very, very optimistic for us. And we actually have this work together with the government that is really having effect on things. Trying to get people involved to the project, to act and to be the change we need for the society. So it is an independent thing. I mean, it's for each person to be the change that we all want, and we say that is so important for everybody. So our mission is very clear when it comes at this point. Because we are just aiming at full inclusion, and our focus is on young people, because we want them to have this same opportunities as other youngsters, and so that is what we are trying to. But at the same time, we are giving attention to these places. That is another discussion, because we have those places yet that is. Separated workplaces, and our point to that is that we need to change those workplaces, and we need to get the economy with us to get some more jobs for those people with disability, and that is not going to change if the economy is not following us, and we can see that is happening now, because we have now these meetings. We have the minister with us. It's unbelievable how active he has been for the last few months for our people, and everybody is we are very hopeful for everybody of what we can see that government is maybe getting the plan on. As well, we have this because, as I said, we need to get everybody at the table together. So what I am actually doing is trying to get them all together and say, hey, now we need to have this talk. And one other stakeholder that is very important thing in this at this table is we have this Directorate of Labor that is taking care of agreement of for young people with disabilities that are getting job, that it is offered job. Then we have this this institution that is a little bit a guideline for our people. So we have this support from the government through that institution, and we as Þroskahjálp as well, we are keeping them on it and trying to be helpful to see where we're lacking and giving them some support and some more effort to be helpful to do actually to try and make these chances together. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's great. So basically what I pull from all of that is you need all stakeholders together sitting at a table and then coming up with solutions, making decisions together that creates an enabling environment that facilitates the type of change we need to see. And I think one of the things that also came up for me hearing you speak was also the leaders that were in the room. And that is very important, having, say leaders from different, in this case, I guess, political spaces and social spaces. And another thing from running an NGO that I can attest to, resources. You need money to be able to actually do anything. So you could have like the best, ambitions. If you don't have money, nothing happens. So also having that environment where you have all the stakeholders, they are supportive, and then you also have the financial resources because money talks, right? That's really important. So people here who have access to money, if you hear a great project, support it because, we need money. Thank you so much for that, Sara. So I'm going to move on to Yves. Okay, so I recognize that you are the only man here. I think all the panels that we have, it's always interesting. I was very proud of my team for putting this panel together this time because it's very diverse. Everyone comes from a different, background. But thank you for being here. So to my question or to my point about you being the only man here, DEIB is like HR, or like the nursing industry. It's dominated by women. And there are relatively few men in this profession. So I will say that throughout this process of mapping the state of diversity and inclusion in Nordics, 95% of the people we've spoken with are men. So much so that when I see a man come on the screen, I'm such a fangirl. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to tokenize you, but hi, good to see you. So my question though is, why do you think that fewer men than women or people enter this space? And what can be done to encourage participation and allyship from men?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, it is indeed really few men, especially when they work in HR, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion initiative. I mean, to be honest, I think I only met 3 people so far throughout my career. But of course, there's a couple of different reasons. The first one is actually because, as we mentioned before, that especially in Sweden, when we only measure the diversity only with the binary, and especially in this really high focus on the female empowerment. So I think there's a lot of hesitation from the company to hire men as well, because they might think that if they hire men, then they forgot about the diversity. But again, they also forget that the man itself is not one homogeneous group. For example, like I'm a person of color, I'm an immigrant background, I'm a refugee background. So like, how can we contribute on this? And that is something that we usually forget. And I think the problem is actually when the company only have a KPI on the gender binary, then they only focus on these measurable things. But also, we cannot deny that is actually there's also an unconscious bias within the recruitment process itself. Especially, we're talking a lot about the women discrimination when they're entering the labor market, but actually there's a couple of research that in several industries that men is actually being discriminated with. And they usually have much more lower salary than female in few different industries. For example, healthcare, or for example, like secretary, for example, that is like some of the job. Because we as a human, we always have a bias on specific job or like specific position. When we mention one job, when we always like, we will think that, oh, this is a female. And we talk another job, then we always think that, oh, this is a male one. So that is also like another thing that we have to be extremely careful when we do like the recruitment or even promotion process in the companies. In regards to the how can we try to invite more male, for example, especially when it's come to this industry or like in this position, I can say. The first thing is actually probably the company can try to do the competency-based recruitment or promotion. So in a sense that they try to avoid bias, both for a different position. And I think that is definitely one thing that they can do. And also probably if they can put a KPI on like a diversity within this industry, then that can be promoting as well. Because one thing that I've learned, especially I've been working in the LGBTQ organization before, the most important thing is actually to find allies. We as an LGBTQ, we need the straight allies to help us in order to move to the equality. And I think that is the dangerous part, especially if we only recruiting like 100% women, and that is becoming a homogeneous group in the opposite. So I think we also need to bring male and also just to get perspective and also just to get understanding on how we can be able to create more male in this industry and to be able to create more changes in the future. Yeah, I think that's probably some of the questions.
Absolutely. So spot on. You know, I often think that, you know, especially when we talk about gender equality, and let's just look at it from the, you know, in the Nordics where it's often the binary gender equality, even in those discourse, we need men, right? We need them at the table because we're not going to move ahead in any form that is measurable and sustainable without their allyship, without their support, without their voices. So it's very important to have this perspective, and thank you for nuancing that so brilliantly. So I'm going to move on to Melanie. Hi, Melanie. So you don't work in DEI. I know you personally. I think you're great, as you know. But DEI has been, you know, when I think of people in Norway who practice DEI, you're one of the first people that come to mind. So my question for you is, what is your why? Why do you do this? Why do you work in this space? And we all know that sometimes it's brutal and it's not always kind, right? So why do you do it? And my second question is, you know, when we're looking at authenticity and intentional DEIB practices, how can companies in Norway refrain from performative DEI initiatives and projects? And in the past couple of years, I've seen a few, no, maybe more than a few. So.
Well, thank you for your questions, and also thank you for your compliments. I am also a big fan of yours. So yes, you know, when you posed the question of why do this, and I don't think I've ever thought about it before, at least not in this kind of context, because it's what I've always done. I grew up in Kansas in the US, and that's a conservative state, and it's right in the middle, and it's fairly white. And so I'm used to being, you know, I used to call it a speck of pepper in a sugar bowl, you know, and so I'm used to being the other, and I like being happy in my environment. And so, I think it kind of stems from an idealistic, you know, journalism point of view of I'm going to change the world, and, you know, I'm going to change my little corner of it. And I find that I can talk about some of these hard topics, encourage people to be uncomfortable, be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's where growth is. And so I fully recognize that. And I've seen people's growth and journey, and anything that I can do to help make people look at something differently, broaden their perspective, open their minds a little bit, then I will always do that. You're right, it's not for the faint of heart. There are times where I just want to throw up my hands and I'm like, "Ugh." You know, it does get very frustrating because it is a passion, and it's very personal. You know, when you're in meetings and people are debating the semantics of how things are and what we should do, or the details and slowing down progress. And I just look around and I'm, you know, that's such great privilege that different, that the workflow can be debated. You know, I just want to get it done because it affects me, and it affects people who look like me, and it affects people who are underrepresented. And I have a big mouth. And so, and it's not that I'm not afraid to use it. I just kind of just blurt out, and then I just kind of own what comes out. And I get a lot of messages afterward, you know, when people hear me speak, where just kind of encouraging me, like, you know, keep going. You're saying what I wish I could always say, and keep doing. And so I think about those folks, and so I'm happy to do it because I do see it making a difference, and I have seen it make a difference. So, and I think with my company being a technology company, I think technology has a great possibility or potential to democratize information, and it can help break down barriers. And so I love that I can talk to my colleagues, you know, in Ukraine, in Russia, in the US, in France, and it's, you know, and they're like this. And I think that that's neat. It has the power to, you know, change the world. So, and then what was the other question?
The other question was, how can companies be less performative, or ideally not performative at all? And if we could have like a quick answer, because then I need to move on.
Yes, sure. I did go a little passionate. I think that it circles back to being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Don't do the popular program that everybody in Norway or in your respective country does. I think that at least in the Nordics, real growth comes from honest to goodness, unconscious bias training. It's not a checkbox exercise. It's ongoing work and ongoing journey. So having a diversity workshop is nowhere near enough. It's a drop in the bucket. It's a journey. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mel. And I do agree. I think that, you know, oftentimes you have this ticky box workshops and like, hey, we did that, we're good. That's not the work. The work continues, and it's never ending, and it continues for years and years and years and years. I think that as long as we are people and we continue to interact with different people, we have to continue to do the work and learn and unlearn and relearn. So I have a lot more questions to ask and very little time. So I'm going to ask you to go jet fast, like what was that superhero? I should know, Flash, but also make it as cohesive as possible. So this is also a difficult task, like make it brave, but make it good. So my next question, I think, is going to, who am I asking? Purnima. Let's talk about allyship. What does it look like in Denmark? Right. How can it be used to amplify intersectional and diverse voices?
So allyship is when we build and nurture relationships with people with whom we don't necessarily share diversity dimensions with. That's how I define allyship. And there's a lot involved in allyship. It's got to be based on a relationship of trust, authenticity, vulnerability, and it takes time to build and be an ally. Being an ally is a verb. It's not a noun. You're not an ally. You don't just show up and say, here I am, I'm an ally. That's not how it works. It's a journey. It's a journey of action. It's a journey of showing up repeatedly. So in my book, I talk about 3 things that you need to be an active ally, because allyship is also, because it's a journey, there's also a range of allyship and demonstration of allyship. On one extreme, you have the very opposite of active allyship, which is actually denial, right? Where people believe homogeneity is actually good and easier and just more convenient and comfortable. And then you have most of us who are passive allies. We believe in diversity and inclusion, but we don't quite know what to do, right? Where we feel like we're stepping on eggshells. We're not sure if we're saying the right thing, doing the right thing. So it's just easier for us to, yes, support it, but support it silently, support it passively. So how do we move towards active allyship? And so when we talk about allyship, and when I refer to allyship, I'm really talking about this active allyship. You need 3 things for it: knowledge, the right attitudes, and frequent and consistent behaviors. There has to be a curiosity to learn, to know more, to understand. There's a lot of information out there available. You don't have to go to someone and make them feel uncomfortable by asking someone from an underrepresented group to explain themselves and to explain their journey. We live in a world with information. As Melanie said earlier, there's a wealth of information out there. Pick it up, read it. That's knowledge. Second one, with attitude. I completely agree with Melanie and Chisom and what they said about diversity and inclusion training or unconscious bias workshops or bias awareness. It's taken us decades to nicely slather on nice and thick all our biases through social conditioning. It's going to take us time. 1 3-hour workshop or even a day is going to do nothing. If anything, it might do some harm. So the right kind of unconscious bias workshops where you're really introspecting, really reflecting, really thinking, that's where change happens. And it needs to be frequent, it needs to be consistent. And the last one is behaviors, really making sure that you're showing up every single day, consistent and frequent behaviors, and demonstrating that. So really attending ERG, employee resource groups, showing support, understanding, building your knowledge, but also making sure that you're conscious about inclusive communication. And what does that look like? Being very aware of your micro behaviors, or which is sometimes known as microaggressions. Really thinking about opportunities to lift, make space, support, amplify, sponsor, mentor. There's so much out there in terms of behaviors where we can do more. And it's about that frequency of that. It's not the one-off attending a pride parade. That doesn't count. It's the frequent, it's the consistent, right? And that's what it's about. So that's allyship in a nutshell. I think that we live in a world, it's not just unique to Denmark. I'd say that I think all my wonderful panelists would probably agree with me that when we look at allyship, we're really living in a world where we're actively an ally to only some groups, not all. We are only lifting some, and that's not enough. For me, that's not enough. If I look at a picture and I see that only some have a seat at the table, that's not okay. And that is not just, even if we look at women, women are intersectional. How can we have a discussion about women when we don't have men at the table? What Yves said earlier, right? We've got to include, we've got to have the right narratives around this. We've learned from the past. So we can't repeat the same mistakes for the future. I get really upset and disheartened sometimes. It's those tough journeys where you see the same things that have been done for the past happening right now. So active allyship, making sure that you really think about intersectionality and making sure representation means real representation, not just representation of some and not just active allyship for some. I hope that was short enough, punchy enough.
That was, oh my gosh, I couldn't love that answer anymore. Thank you for that. Allyship is a verb, people. It is a verb. It's a action word and a doing word, right? Thank you. I'm going to move on to so much I want to unpack, but I don't have time. So I'm just going to move on to Sara. So my question for you, you talked about how your organization have successfully, created more inclusion, especially around disability inclusion in the workplace. So within diversity, the larger construct of diversity and inclusion in Iceland, what are current opportunities? What are things that are going well, or what are things that can be improved? and yeah, as quickly as possible as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As I said before, yes, what we see opportunities, the big opportunity for us right now is the this willing and positivity from the government right now, and that is yeah, maybe it's a little bit sad, but it is very important to get things through, is that to have everybody on board. And as you said, and I said before, the money is what talks. And when you have the system of this changing very slow, then we need to push and we need to be on it and we need to be on the talk. And so we need yeah, this power really from people and from the people self. And that is actually what we are doing as well as an organization. We have always, I mean, even though I'm not with the disabilities, but I have another experience because I'm a lesbian, so I know the this fighting for the rights, and we do need to have the people by themselves at the table to have their voice. That is the strongest and the loudest voice that you can bring on, and we can feel that because we have got Throskahjálp has as an organization, we have a very good, we have a big goodwill from the government. So we have this platform to have to bring our people in, and we have this. It is credible that when we get the meetings with ministers and we take our people with us, and then they listen to the real stories and to see the people and facing them, and then you get. I mean, it's much more powerful. So we can see that we have the opportunities right now to be stronger and louder. But we know as well, it depends on the person. It depends on the person that are the government on its time. So yeah, I mean, it's very shaky though. But we have this time right now, and we have to be on it every day. And as you said, it's a long way. It's a project that you are working on it every day, not with just one meeting or so. So
absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And, you know, what came up for me here was, you know, you have to wear the shoe to know where it hurts, right? And when we're doing projects, well, when we have initiative, we always have to, I love to say, ask, is everybody in the room? Is everyone who should be here in the room? So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Yves, and I want to talk a little bit about recruitment, because just bringing it back to the workplace, where what we find in Norway, and I think just in talking to different actors and practitioners from across the Nordics, the same I understand is true, where we talk about culture fit versus culture contribution. So people want to hire you if you know, ski like them, you go to the same vacation spots, you eat brown cheese, and you know, you went to the same kindergarten, right? So it's that culture fit, like, okay, I know this person, I know we will work well together, but then you miss out on all these amazing other people who have a different background than you. So from a recruitment perspective, and specifically just drilling into the LGBTQIA plus community, because there's this running idea that the Nordics is this land flowing of milk and honey for we're looking at workplace inclusion for community. Do you think that all people within that community
and even within the LGBTQ community? So there's quite a lot of like anti-POC in a sense, especially when you go to the dating app, for example. And even in the working place, there's also similar way, even though they call themselves that, oh, we're LGBTQ friendly. But then if you're having an immigrant background, or if you don't have any Western sounding names, then of course your salary might be lower. That is the fact. But most importantly, is actually you might not even be called for the interview in the first place. Because I remember that I had like the first time I started my career in Sweden, one of the HR person that I talked with, they actually suggest that I have to erase my native language. I just have to make my CV as wide as possible just to be called for the interview. And that is actually shown that we're not being valued, even though Sweden probably is like one of the countries who's really advanced when it comes to the LGBTQ. But this intersectionality is definitely something that we always forgot.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to move to Melanie. So I think this question is very topical right now. And I think with your experience, with your background in media and communication, I want to talk about the war in Ukraine. Recently, it's been covered by reporters, and we see that we've also seen display of heartbreaking and appalling racism and prejudice against, people of color and people who are not white or people who don't have blue eyes and blonde hair. So my question is, what role does the media take in communication, in communicating the values that are inherent in the wider society, and what improvements needs to be made to ensure that the media sector do a better job than recently displayed?
I think the biggest thing is for journalists, we always want to, strive for objectivity. And I think that, it's a great thing to try to achieve, but it's hard because, and I would say next to like nearly impossible, because we all bring our own experiences. We all have bias. We all have isms, as I like to call them. And I think the best way is to just understand that we all have isms, be open to them, be mindful of them, and to be sensitive. And because it is extremely harmful. Words have power, words have meaning. And to see how the journalists have covered it and talk about, all these terrible things that look just like, the people look just like you and me, just being mindful of that. And I'm hopeful that the journalists are taking a minute and reviewing their actions and not just saying, oh, I didn't mean it like that. But you know what? It happened. It was said. The harm was done. And so own it and learn from it. And please don't do it again.
Thanks for that. Yeah, what comes up for me is the intent is different from impact. And earlier, Poornima talked about microaggressions, right? Even though it's like, oh, this small thing that I didn't mean, the impacts that it has is quite enormous. I would say, even for myself personally, just reading the news 2 weeks ago on a Saturday, my entire weekend was ruined because I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, people have to deal with the violence, of war, and then they have to deal with the violence and the trauma of racism. Like the double whammy is insane, right? So it's definitely, I think we all must pay attention to the intent is significantly different from impact, and impact is exactly what matters. And coming on to my last question for Yesmith. So I want to talk a little bit about power and privilege. And I think that as a DEI practitioner, it is very essential to allow or to create space for minority and diverse voices that they should be heard. However, in many companies, there is a low level of diversity in entry-level positions. But no, I guess what I'm trying to say here, is in a lot of companies, we have a higher level of diversity in entry-level positions, and then a lower level of diverse voices in C-level and managerial positions. I hope that was clear. So what the companies have to do to change their culture and embrace diversity across all its levels and structures.
Yes, thank you for your question, and thank you for pointing out actually that I am in a privileged position, I acknowledge it fully that, for example, when I am doing this for a living, a lot of people listen to what I am saying. And what I try to do in order to influence that aspect is that when people are very proud of their diverse team, for example, I think that is something that I always applaud, and I always encourage them to be proud of what they have. But I also encourage them quite often and very soon after to actually self-reflect and then ask, like, okay, but do you have representation, but are they actually being represented in all levels of organization? And if not, you do not have a diverse team, but rather you just have a segregated team that is representing someone else in the organization. If you do not have the representation all across the organization, your team is not really diverse. You have some representatives somewhere, and sometimes that can even be perceived as tokenization. And this is why I also always speak about equity. If you're not allowing the career paths to actually go into a position that allows people to thrive and to actually thrive for those positions and to actually make it to the end and to the leadership, then you're actually not doing very well. And I mean, and this is, I hope you don't get me wrong. I applaud the efforts that are being made, but what I'm trying to say is that good intentions are not enough. Structures have to be in place, and very specific processes need to happen in order to make a change happen. And if you do have your privilege, as I do, and as many of us do, it is important to acknowledge and to practice good allyship. Am I actually able to convey some of that power and some of that privilege to someone else in order to make them advance? And that is something that it may be painful. It feels good to have privileges. I don't think anyone can disagree with that. But the matter of fact is that we have to share them if we are actually really going to be creating an inclusive society and inclusive organizations. So I hope I managed to answer your question, but I believe that what is important is that we make the self-reflection exercise that, yes, you may have representation, but do you have it all across the organization, or is it just located somewhere? And you are, like, usually people get overwhelmed, and perhaps this is why people are not actually going beyond the sort of conversation of, yes, this is important, to actually doing something, is because organizations or people who are driving the change tend to be overwhelmed. But I think you have to ask the hard questions, as Melanie said. This is not about you being comfortable. If you're comfortable, you're already at the stage where you have to walk away from that.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. So we're coming to the end of this segment. I just want to ask each one of you very quickly if we can do this in one word or one short sentence. What is your top tips, or top tip, let's do one, for including more diverse voices in the workplace and society at large? So I'm just going to go through my screen again and start with Purnima.
Okay, I've got so many, but one, right? Just one. Be that active ally. Show up every single day as an active ally, not passive, not in denial, active.
Thanks, Poornima. Yves?
Yeah, you cannot improve what you cannot measure. So my tips, especially to the management level, put it as a KPI, track it, tie it to the performance management system. Then everything is going to start to work on that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Sara?
Yeah, thank you. In the short way, I think we need to educate people. We need to be, the voice need to be loud, and we need to be this conversation all day long, and have the people by themselves, the voices are the strongest. So we need to support people to stay stay out there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yesmith?
Yes, I guess I can summarize it to just being intentional. And what I mean by this is not just having the good intentions of doing something, but actually being intentional, and as in allocating the resources, allocating the time, and knowing what is that you're going to do. It doesn't matter that you're like, yeah, we're going to become diverse and we're going to be very inclusive if you don't have a plan on actually how to do it. It is hard. Don't get discouraged, but be intentional to actually continue to do it even when it gets tough. So I guess that's it.
Thank you. And Melanie?
Accept that we all have isms, learn from them, roll up your sleeves, and let's get to work.
Thank you all for this. I just wanted to like scream, I guess I can do it, like preach and amen to that. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and your insights. We have quite a few questions, and I've also received some questions privately to ask you all. So I'm going to just get started. The first question I see here, I believe, is from Nikki. What specific actions do you want politicians in your countries to take in order to further DEIB across society? Purnima, what do you think about this question?
Yeah, I think it would be really nice to have politicians who look at intersectionality and give space and invite to the conversations. I think right now, conversations happen without actually everyone being in the room who's supposed to be there. I love what you said earlier, Chisom. You know, check, is everyone who's supposed to be there? You can't have a discussion about women if you don't have intersectional women present. You can't have a discussion about disabilities if you don't have intersectional disabilities there. So really making sure that we are, you know, very conscious about this. I'd love for politicians to get actually diverse voices in the room representing the people that they're representing. That's my message.
Thanks, Purnima. Yesmith?
Yeah, well, what I think is that perhaps, for example, when it comes to international, let's look at that very aspect. I think that people think about it from the integration perspective, and I think that that is so very outdated. If we are not talking about inclusion, we are never going to have any progress. So what I would like to hear politicians talking about is not integration or gender parity or anything of the sort. I would like to challenge them to actually talk about inclusion, and inclusion does not ever go without intersection. And so I guess I would challenge them to go for it. And this also resonates with what Sara was saying. This is about knowledge, and this is about the ever quest of learning in this topic. So.
Absolutely, thank you. Melanie?
You know, just I think echoing what my fellow panelists have said before, we need to, what gets measured gets done. And so we need proper measurements. We need to have policies that meet people where they're at, meaning equity, not equality, because we're, you know, oh, we're all the same, but we have different needs, equal access to common opportunities. And so again, we need people to stop making platitudes and actually come up with programs that work, and be mindful that we're not going to get it right. But at least we're trying, and it's iterative work. We learn as we go. It's a learning, it's a process, it's a journey. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. Sara?
What was the question, actually? What?
So the question was, what would you like politicians in your country to do more to facilitate a more inclusive society?
Yeah. What we need, actually, we need more action plans, and we need, because everybody do agree that we need to change things. I mean, we have talked about it many years, way back, that we need changes. The big issue is that the system changes so slow, and we don't take this responsibility because the system is something else than we are. So because we can't blame maybe the persons or people that are working in the system, but we need to get that the power, the government, to take these changes to the forward. So we need to see politicians that do what they say, and that is just what needs to happen.
Absolutely, do what you say. Action speaks louder than words. Yves, same question.
Yeah, I think like the first thing is actually not denying the situation first, because they cannot create any policy if they don't see it as a problem. So they need to understand that this is the problem. I think that's in the first place. And sometimes it also needs to be translated into action plan. For example, now we have a salary mapping, which is a responsibility for a company to map between salary men and male and female. But we forgot that the salary mapping is actually forget about the race, for example. And actually that might be needed. For example, if you want to see that the salary gap is actually closed, not only on the gender basis, but also other intersectionality, just for example.
Absolutely. To solve a problem, you have to first admit that it exists, right? So yeah, thank you for that. Okay, the next question here, I think is a bit interesting. It's, where can I find a benchmark on paternity leave for tech startups in the UK? I don't know that does anyone have answers to that question? Or Anna, you can reach out to us later and we can connect you to somebody who does. But here we're talking about.
If you want a bit of inspiration, I'll say go and look at Deloitte and their latest paternity or shared parental leave rather policy around co-parents, adoptive parents, gay and lesbian parents. I think it's an incredible policy. So if you want a bit of inspiration, it's not from the tech industry, but I think it's truly inspiring what they're trying to do. Yeah.
And I think as well, if you do a Google search, you should be able to find things that are relevant for the UK. Okay, so the next question here, perhaps it's a comment. The personal is political. That's the problem. If you can call an issue political without having it be personal, that's the crux of the problem when you are sharing your opinion, especially as a leader. Okay. So I guess I'm going to move to, I think she followed up with another question, but I'm going to attend to Susanna's first. What do you think are the core reasons why, despite a lot of DEI conversations in the corporate world, companies in the Nordics are still stuck on focusing on binary gender? So basically, why are companies in the Nordics focused on binary gender? Is it conscious or ignorance or unwillingness to change? Have you heard some flimsy excuses from companies lately? This is like 3 questions to unpack. So who wants to have a go? Yeah, Purnima.
I've got so much to say. I'll keep it short and snappy, and hopefully give others a chance as well. I think we have a positivity bias in this region. We're influenced by the impact of Jantelo or the equivalent of really looking at equality. We make an assumption that we're actually looking at each other equally. And when looking at things equally, we don't recognize that the journey that we've been on, each one of us, is different. We don't acknowledge that the racetrack is different. For some, it's a clear racetrack. For others, there are pebbles, and for others, there are boulders. And when we have this positivity bias influenced by an intersection of that with Janteloven, we think that the world is actually pretty equal when it isn't. And that's an important one as well. I've got so many others to share, but I'll wait. I'll give others a chance.
And just to nuance Jantelo for whoever is here who is not from the Nordics, Purnima, do you want to say a little bit about it?
Yes, of course. Sorry. So Jantelo is a set of 10 laws that was written by a Danish-Norwegian author in the 1850s, if I'm not wrong. It was written in a book, and it's a set of 10 rules, you could say. I think that's probably the closest that it comes to it. The underpinning theme of all the 10 rules is that you are not to think that you are any different from anyone else. That's the underlying theme through it. And so that really is pervasive in society in terms of equality. And it's also responsible for some of the equality that we do experience here relative in positive ways compared to other parts of the world. But it's also the one thing that stands in our way as a barrier, because we make assumptions that the world is actually equal or experienced equally when it is in fact not.
Thank you for that. Yesmith, you wanted to add something to?
Just very quickly, I think that that it is very hard to well, it was hard enough to go to conversations and then talking about the importance and whatnot. And now people are already sort of feeling comfortable there, and now they are like, hi, now how do I make it happen? In all honesty, I think that first of all, this has not been prioritized. This is not part of the business strategy. It's a matter of fact. And when it is not part of the business strategy, then there is a little allocation of resources, and I'm talking about team and I'm talking about money. The matter of fact is that this requires specific actions, and it requires time, and it requires a lot of people. At least here in Finland, there is a tendency now of people, for example, hiring, or organizations hiring head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But then those people tend to be burned out because they're expected to do everything. So I believe that what happens is structure, that there is a lack of structure, and that is where I believe this is where the problem is coming from, perhaps. But this is also to echo what Yves was saying, like, if we are not measuring what is happening, then exactly what is that you're going to be intending to do. So I think it's a lack of knowing which path to follow.
Thanks for that. I have a private question here. So I will read it without mentioning the person's name. As a white male working with DEI, what are some tools for how to create space for intersectionality without the risk of tokenizing specific individuals or identities? How do we also create space for our white male contributions without being perceived as upkeeping the patriarchy? This is a big one. Who wants to take a gander?
I can start, probably.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think like the first thing that is actually to understand that, okay, of course, like as a white male, probably they have like a higher privilege compared to the others, but it doesn't mean that they have to stop, or like doesn't mean that they should not involve in this DEI initiative. Because I think their perspective is actually much more needed, because they understand, especially if you want to focus on the allyship. So I think that is definitely something that they should be proud of, instead of they feel to be ashamed of. But also another thing is actually one thing that they also have to do is actually try to involve other people with other backgrounds. So in a sense that to have a bigger comprehensive pictures instead of only one single pictures. I mean, if they're going to be the leading person, it's completely fine, as long as the voices of other people is also being heard. So just to follow up what the Purnima mentioned before, everyone should be in the table, because if only a specific person is on the table, then the bias is going to be there.
Absolutely. Does anyone have any more to add to that? The question, just to say it again, is how do we create space for intersectionality without it becoming tokenism? And how do we create space for white male contribution without upkeeping the patriarchy? Melanie?
I think just being authentic and open about your intentions, and say, you know, I'm not going to, don't downplay yourself and say, oh, I'm just a white guy, and so what do I know? You know, you bring your own experiences. And I am a mentor to a young white guy, actually a couple of them, I think about it, but and we talk a lot about, you know, what do you think of like diversity and all of this focus on, you know, a young man in his 20s, and we, you know, all this stuff about like women empowerment and girls, and I'm a mother of 2 boys, and so I just am curious of what that's like. And so I would just say, be authentic and be okay with your privilege. And you can use it to open doors. If you notice that someone's not at the table, just, you know, it's not tokenism. It just go ahead and raise the question, and listen more than talk. And if you feel yourself getting defensive for anybody, then that's okay, but still just listen and just take it in and process. It's a journey. Be gentle to yourself and be gentle with others.
Thanks, Melanie. Such great advice. And I'm going to move on to the next question from M. What advice do you have for de-escalating unhelpful conversations on social media, particularly those focalizing on perpetuating isms say between black and, so basically black and white issues. I think she nuanced this, that when she was talking about black and white, she wasn't talking about race, but kind of like, it's not black or white. I think that there's a lot of trauma.
Sorry, I meant like black and white type of like thinking. Like this is a very like binary thought pattern, not like black white race relations. Because in my own experience, I'm from the US, and black white race relations are entirely different there and the entire conversation. And I have noticed in the Nordics that there's more of, how do I put this, Islamophobia driving the conversation around racism among like at least a lot of like Finns I've met personally.
Yes. So so thanks for clarifying that. So Melanie, you wanted to answer this? Yeah. So how do we combat negative effects?
I work a lot with social media and have for a very, very long time. And honestly, I think as far as de-escalating, you're probably, people say big and bold things that they would from behind their screen. I don't think that anyone's ever not necessarily going to just say, you know what, you're right. We are, equity is important, or whoever, like whatever, it's hard. You might not change their minds. And so as far as de-escalating, the best thing to do, like I tell my kid, walk away, and you can focus on the positive, put the time and the energy into making the difference instead of trying to change someone's mind, because people, they dig in. And,
it's always allies who seem to do this, and like at least in my bubble, because I can't see anybody who's really like not an ally in real life anymore. So it's frustrating because like I've worked for like also in I will call it journalism air quotes because it was roughly, if you know, but so like for like I've also seen like the effects of social media like firsthand behind the scenes, and
you're dropping off a bit, but we're running out of time. So I would have to jump on to the next question. But I think to your point, or what I think you were saying, what came up for me was what, Poornima said about active allyship, like being active allyship. So if somebody is an ally and you find them doing things that is not, an example of active allyship, then they need to go back to the drawing board, because everyone likes to think they're allies until, they have to be, and then they're not. So I think we have to go back to that. So the next question here is from Eva. Very often when talking about sharing power, people think that they will end up with less power. Yeah, that's a good one. That they will lose power in the process. What would you say to those people? So basically the question here is, can we share power and understand that we won't lose it? Purnima.
I think we have diversity and inclusion all wrong if we think about it this way. This is not an either or game. This is an and game. This is not about putting any one group on the table means that another group is going to lose out. The reality is, if we're thinking about this right, if we're thinking about diversity in its holistic way, in its intersectional way, if we're looking at the value right, then there's a benefit for us all. And it's an and, it's not either or. We have been conditioned into thinking that it's either or because our systems and our biases that are embedded in our systems are making us think that it's either or. If we rethink the systems, if we do it right, this is an and. This is only positive for everyone across all of what we're looking at when it comes to diversity. So I think we really need to challenge this way of looking at it. Yeah.
And just to add up to that, like actually to be an inclusive leader, for example, like people who are truly inclusive, we understand that doesn't diminish you in any capacity. It is so outdated that it hurts my heart to think that someone may even think that still at this point. So I guess it's about reassurance, and then just to reminding people that providing, like sharing privilege and sharing power is actually a good thing. It will elevate. I don't know, it hurts me to think that someone would still be conflicted by
Thank you for that, Yesmith. And I also want to share Melanie's answer here. She says diversity is not a pie. Together we all win. So yes, you know, there's enough for all of us. There's space for all of us. And we have come more or less to the end of this conversation because it's 1:30. I feel like we can go on for hours. So I want to take this time and thank Purnima, Yves, Sara, Yesmith, and Melanie for being here with us today and sharing their perspective. We will also collect all their wise thoughts and put it in a nice infographic that we will also make available so you can also continue to reflect on some of the points and the insights that they shared today. But I thank not but, and I thank you all for your time. I thank you all for being here, for the participants, for those on LinkedIn with us as well. Thank you so much for taking the time and being with us. And thank you for being a part of this conversation. And I hope that together we can amplify the need for inclusion and intersectional inclusion in the Nordics, and also creates a society where everyone can be valued, seen, and heard as they are, and empowered to thrive. So thank you all so very much for your time and for being here.